There are places in this world that seem to exist outside the reach of chaos. Quiet neighborhoods where children play in tree-lined streets, where the most pressing concern might be the traffic on a Monday morning, or perhaps which cafe to visit on a lazy Sunday afternoon. These are the sanctuaries people dream of, the suburbs that promise peace, safety, a refuge from the relentless pulse of the metropolis. In Hong Kong, one such place is Tai Po, a residential district known for its serenity, its sprawling green spaces, and its reputation as one of the safest corners of one of Asia's most vibrant cities. It is the kind of place where families plant roots, where crime seems like a distant rumor, where neighbors greet each other with genuine warmth. But in February of 2023, something happened in Tai Po that shattered that illusion of tranquility. Something so disturbing that it would echo far beyond the quiet streets where it unfolded. And if you find yourself drawn to the mysteries that hide beneath the surface of everyday life, if you seek to understand the darkness that can flourish even in the most unexpected places, then you've come to the right corner of the internet. Consider subscribing, because there are countless stories waiting to be told, enigmas that refuse to rest, and we've only just begun to uncover them. This story begins, as so many tragedies do, with something ordinary. A moving truck appeared outside a small apartment building in Tai Po. It was late February, and a family was moving into a modest flat. Neighbors watched casually as boxes and furniture were unloaded onto the sidewalk, the mundane ritual of relocation playing out before them. But as the hours passed, something began to feel wrong. The items being carried into the apartment were not the usual trappings of domestic life. There were no sofas, no beds, no cheerful decorations that speak of new beginnings. Instead, the movers hauled in a meat grinder, an electric saw, raincoats, tarps. Each object, taken alone, might have seemed unremarkable, but together, they formed a collection that whispered of something darker, something that had no place in a quiet residential neighborhood. The neighbors noticed other things too. In the days following the move, the family began covering every window of the flat with dark fabric, blocking out any view of the interior. Even the small panes of glass in the front door were obscured with black boarding. It was as if they were sealing themselves inside, ensuring that whatever was happening within those walls would remain invisible to the outside world. The neighbors exchanged glances, uneasy questions forming in their minds. But in a culture that values privacy and discretion, no one intervened. No one knocked on the door to ask if everything was all right. And so the days passed, the apartment remaining silent and impenetrable, its windows like closed eyes refusing to witness what was unfolding behind them. And then the police arrived. They came with a search warrant, moving swiftly through the door of the flat, and what they discovered inside would become one of the most shocking crime scenes in Hong Kong's recent history. In the kitchen, a large pot sat on the stove, steam still rising from its surface. Inside, a soup was cooking, vegetables bobbing in the murky broth. Carrots, radishes, and floating among them, the severed head of a woman. Her legs were found in the refrigerator, carefully stored as if they were nothing more than ingredients waiting to be used. The woman was Abby Choi, a 28-year-old socialite, fashion influencer, and philanthropist whose face had graced the covers of international magazines. And the family who had moved into that flat, who had brought meat grinders and saws and tarps, was the family of her ex-husband. To understand how Abby Choi's life ended in such horrific circumstances, we must first understand who she was, and how a young woman of extraordinary wealth and privilege came to be connected to the people who would ultimately take her life. Abby was born on July 15, 1994, in Hong Kong. The woman the world came to know as a fashion icon, attending Paris Fashion Week and appearing in Vogue, Elle, and Harper's Bazaar, did not begin her life surrounded by luxury. Her family was comfortable but ordinary. It was only after her mother divorced her biological father and remarried that the financial landscape of Abby's childhood began to shift. Her stepfather and mother went into business together, investing in construction and mining ventures in mainland China. The timing was fortunate, the ventures successful, and over the years the family's wealth grew exponentially. By the time Abby reached adulthood, she was a multimillionaire. Though the exact extent of her fortune remains a matter of speculation, some reports placed her net worth at $17 million. Others claim $38 million. One publication suggested it was as high as $700 million. The truth, as with so many things in this story, remains elusive, obscured by conflicting accounts and incomplete records. But what is clear, what every source agrees upon, is that Abby Choi was not the person many assume when they hear the word heiress. She was not spoiled, not cruel, not dismissive of those she considered beneath her station. By all accounts, she was kind, gracious, respectful to everyone she encountered, whether they were fellow millionaires at exclusive galas or the household staff who worked in her home. She treated people with a warmth that seemed to transcend the barriers of wealth and class. Beyond her kindness, she was deeply committed to philanthropy. She donated generously to causes close to her heart, particularly animal welfare. She co-founded a charitable organization dedicated to rescuing and caring for street animals, pouring both her time and her resources into the effort. In a world where wealth often breeds indifference, Abby seemed determined to use her fortune to create something better, to lift up those who could not lift themselves. And then there was Alex Kong. Abby met him when she was still a teenager, and by the time she turned 18, they were married. The details of their first meeting are somewhat unclear. Some sources claim they attended the same school during their adolescence. Others suggest they went to different schools that were located near each other, and that mutual friends brought them together. What is certain is that they began dating young, and that their relationship moved quickly from romance to marriage. From the beginning, Abby's family had reservations. Alex did not come from wealth. He was middle class, perhaps upper middle class, comfortable but nowhere near the financial stratosphere that Abby inhabited. This disparity was not necessarily a problem in itself. Abby seemed unbothered by it, deeply in love and willing to share her world with him. But looking back, one has to wonder if Alex's eagerness to marry so young was driven less by love and more by the allure of the life Abby could provide. Whether he saw in her not just a partner, but an escape from financial limitation, a doorway into a world he could never have accessed on his own. The marriage produced 2 children, a son and a daughter, and for a time, it seemed stable. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. In 2021, Abby and Alex divorced. The reasons were never made fully public, but those close to the situation hinted at fundamental incompatibilities, at a relationship that had run its course. Yet even after the divorce, Abby's generosity toward Alex and his family did not waver. She continued to support them financially, paying for their living expenses, ensuring they wanted for nothing. She purchased a luxury apartment worth 10 million Hong Kong dollars and allowed Alex's family to live there. She paid the children's school fees, covered their day-to-day costs, made sure they had everything they needed. It was an arrangement that spoke to Abby's character, her commitment to her children's well-being, and perhaps also to a lingering sense of loyalty to the man she had once loved. But while Abby moved forward with her life, Alex seemed to spiral. In the months following the divorce, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He began making poor financial decisions, chasing risky ventures that promised quick returns but delivered only losses. And then, in a move that would later prove significant, he started a peculiar scheme. Alex began befriending wealthy individuals, people who trusted him because of his association with Abby's family. He would convince them to lend him valuable items, gold, jewelry, expensive watches, under the pretense of needing them temporarily. And then he would sell these items, pocketing the money and disappearing before the owners realized what had happened. It was a con, pure and simple, and it worked for a while because people assumed that anyone connected to the Choi family fortune must be trustworthy. But eventually, his victims began to catch on, and complaints were filed with the police. Meanwhile, Abby had moved on romantically. She began a relationship with a man named Chris, the son of a prominent Hong Kong family that had built a fortune in the herbal supplement industry. Chris was everything Alex was not: stable, successful, established. The two seemed genuinely happy together, and before long, Abby announced that she was expecting another child. Her third. It was a new chapter, a fresh start, and those who knew her said she seemed lighter, more content than she had been in years. She continued her work in fashion, attending shows, collaborating with brands, building her presence in an industry that valued both her aesthetic sensibility and her genuine warmth. She maintained her philanthropic efforts, expanding her work with animal welfare organizations and exploring new causes. Her life, from the outside, appeared to be flourishing, but the Kong family's situation was deteriorating. Alex's father had invested in property, using money that likely came from Abby, but he had overextended himself and failed to keep up with mortgage payments. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings, threatening to seize the property. It was against this backdrop of mounting financial pressure that Abby made a decision that would have fatal consequences. She informed Alex's family that she intended to sell the luxury apartment she had purchased for them. Her reasons remain unclear. Perhaps she needed the capital for other investments and planned to purchase a less expensive property for them instead. Perhaps she had grown weary of subsidizing a family that seemed to take her generosity for granted, whose younger son posted photographs on social media flaunting expensive alcohol and lavish meals, all funded by her wealth. Or perhaps it was simply a practical decision. one she felt entitled to make given that the apartment had been purchased with her money. Whatever her reasoning, she had every right to sell the property. It was hers. But to Alex's father, the decision felt like a betrayal, a threat to the financial security his family had come to depend on. There is a detail that makes the entire situation even more complicated, even more tragic. When Abby purchased the $10 million apartment, she placed the title in her ex-father-in-law's name. She did this for two reasons. First, she trusted him. And second, Hong Kong's property tax structure makes first-time home purchases significantly less expensive. Since this was not Abby's first property, putting it in his name allowed the family to avoid substantial taxes. It was a gesture of trust and generosity, but it also meant that legally, the apartment belonged to him. And now, with the bank threatening to take his other property, this apartment represented the family's last remaining asset, the only thing standing between them and financial ruin. According to the police investigation, it was this confluence of factors that led to what happened next: the impending sale of the apartment, the family's mounting debts, and perhaps most significantly, a burning resentment toward the woman who had given them so much, but who they now saw as taking away their security. The Kong family began to plan. They rented the small flat in Tai Po, a place far from their usual neighborhoods, a place where they would not be recognized. They acquired tools, a meat grinder, an electric saw, tarps and raincoats to protect against blood spatter. They covered the windows to ensure privacy, and then they set their plan in motion. On February 21st, 2023, Abby Choi left her home to pick up her daughter from school. But her daughter was not at school that day, and Abby never arrived to pick her up. By late afternoon, when she failed to return home, her current partner Chris began to worry. He tried calling her phone repeatedly, but there was no answer. He reached out to friends and family, asking if anyone had seen her. No one had. As the hours passed and darkness fell, his worry turned to panic. He contacted the police and filed a missing person report. Abby had vanished without a trace. The investigation began immediately. Police reviewed surveillance footage from the area where Abby was last seen. They traced her movements throughout the day, piecing together her final hours, and they discovered something crucial. The last person seen with Abby was Alex's younger brother, the man who had been working as her private driver. He had picked her up that morning, and she had gotten into his car willingly, trusting him, as she had trusted the entire Kong family. But instead of taking her to her intended destination, he had driven her to the flat in Tai Po, the flat with the covered windows, where his family was waiting. When police arrived at the Tai Po apartment, what they found was a scene of calculated brutality. The meat grinder and electric saw had been used to dismember Abby's body. Her head and legs had been kept, while other parts had apparently been disposed of elsewhere, in ways the investigation would later attempt to trace. The soup pot on the stove suggested something even more disturbing: that the family had been cooking her remains, perhaps in an attempt to destroy evidence or perhaps for reasons too horrifying to fully contemplate. The discovery was devastating, not just for Abby's family and loved ones, but for the entire Hong Kong community. This was not a crime of passion, not a sudden eruption of violence born from a momentary loss of control. This was premeditated, methodical, carried out by people Abby had known for years, people she had supported financially and emotionally, people she had trusted with her life. Within days, the arrests began. On February 25th, Alex Kong was apprehended at a pier in Hong Kong as he attempted to flee the country by boat. His plan had been to reach Macau, where he perhaps hoped to disappear into the crowds or arrange further passage to mainland China. But police intercepted him before he could escape. His father and his brother were arrested shortly thereafter, both charged with murder. Alex's mother was charged with obstruction of justice for her role in attempting to conceal the crime. 3 additional people were charged with assisting Alex's attempted escape, including a couple who had allegedly arranged the boat transport for 300,000 Hong Kong dollars. Even Alex's father's mistress, a detail that added another layer of complexity to the family's dynamics, was arrested for her role in the cover-up, though she was later released on bail. The question that haunted everyone following the case was simply, why? Why would this family, who had benefited so enormously from Abby's generosity, commit such an unspeakable act against her? The answer, according to investigators, was brutally simple: greed. The apartment represented financial security, and they could not bear to lose it. Rather than accept that Abby had the right to make decisions about her own property, rather than express gratitude for the years of support she had provided, they chose murder. They chose to eliminate the person who stood between them and what they believed they deserved. It was a crime born not from desperation or self-defense, but from entitlement and avarice. The legal proceedings have unfolded slowly, as such cases often do. In June of 2024, Alex Kong was convicted and sentenced to 3.5 years in prison for the gold and jewelry fraud scheme he had been running. The scam that had victimized people who trusted him because of his connection to the Choi family. But that sentence had nothing to do with Abby's murder. The murder trial itself has been repeatedly delayed, pushed back by procedural requirements and the complexity of the evidence. As of the most recent updates in mid-2025, Alex, his father, and his brother remain in custody, awaiting trial. The couple who assisted in Alex's escape attempt were sentenced to 6 months in prison. But for Abby's family, for her 2 young children who lost their mother, for her partner who lost the woman he planned to build a future with, there has been no closure, no sense that justice has truly been served. More than 2 years have passed since that terrible day in February, when Abby Choi's life was stolen from her in the most brutal way imaginable. Her story has become a cautionary tale, a reminder that wealth cannot buy safety, that generosity can be met with betrayal, that the people we trust most can sometimes harbor the darkest intentions. It has sparked conversations across Hong Kong and beyond about domestic violence, about financial abuse, about the ways in which entitlement and greed can corrupt even familial bonds. And it has left an entire community grappling with the reality that something so horrific could happen in a place like Tai Po, in a neighborhood known for its peace and safety. There is something particularly tragic about Abby's story beyond the violence of her death. It is the fact that her generosity, her kindness, the very qualities that made her beloved by so many, may have contributed to her vulnerability. She trusted the Kong family because she had loved Alex once, because they were the grandparents and uncle of her children, because she believed in maintaining those connections even after the marriage ended. She supported them financially because she could, because she wanted to ensure her children's extended family was cared for, because that was who she was. And they repaid that trust and generosity with betrayal and murder. The investigation revealed details that make the crime even more chilling. The Kong family did not act impulsively. They planned methodically, renting the apartment weeks in advance, acquiring the tools they would need, ensuring they had a space where they could carry out their plan without interruption. Alex's brother, acting as Abby's driver, had access to her schedule, knew when she would be alone, knew how to get her to the location without raising suspicion. It was a conspiracy that required coordination among multiple family members, each playing their assigned role. And the fact that they attempted to cook her remains suggests they believed they could destroy the evidence completely, that Abby would simply vanish and no one would ever know what had happened to her. But crimes like this, crimes that involve so many people and such elaborate planning, rarely go undetected. Someone always makes a mistake. In this case, it was the suspicious behavior that drew the neighbors' attention. The unusual items being moved into the apartment, the covered windows, the sense that something was deeply wrong. And once the police began investigating Abby's disappearance, it did not take long to trace her movements to that flat in Tai Po. The physical evidence was overwhelming. The murder weapons, the remains, the attempts to dispose of the body, all pointed to the Kong family's guilt. As the legal process continues to unfold, Abby's family has remained relatively private in their grief. They have not given extensive interviews or made public statements demanding vengeance. Instead, they have focused on caring for Abby's children, on preserving her memory, on ensuring that she is remembered not for the horrific circumstances of her death, but for the way she lived. Her charitable foundation continues its work rescuing street animals. The fashion industry has paid tribute to her contributions, and those who knew her personally have shared stories that paint a picture of a woman who was so much more than her wealth, who used her privilege to try to make the world a little better, who treated everyone with dignity and respect. There is a broader conversation that Abby's case has sparked, one that extends beyond the specifics of her murder to larger questions about wealth, family, and obligation. When does generosity cross the line into enabling? When does supporting family members become subsidizing their dysfunction? Abby clearly believed in taking care of the people connected to her children, even after her divorce from Alex. She could have cut off his family financially, insisted they support themselves, drawn clear boundaries between her current life and her past. But she chose generosity instead, and that choice ultimately cost her everything. Some have criticized her for being too giving, for allowing the Kong family to become dependent on her wealth, for not recognizing the resentment that dependence could breed. But that criticism feels hollow in the face of what happened. The fault lies not with Abby for being generous, but with the Kong family for believing they were entitled to her money, for valuing a luxury apartment more than a human life, for choosing murder over accepting a loss of privilege. Abby did nothing wrong. She was kind, she was trusting, and she paid for those qualities with her life. The case has also raised questions about the systems in place to protect individuals from those who might seek to harm them. Abby's ex-husband was already under investigation for fraud when she disappeared. His financial desperation and erratic behavior were known. Could more have been done to recognize the danger she faced? Should there have been warnings, protections, interventions? Or was this crime so carefully planned, so deliberately concealed, that no amount of vigilance could have prevented it? These are questions without easy answers, but they are questions that must be asked if we hope to prevent similar tragedies in the future. As this story reaches its conclusion, there is no neat resolution to offer. No sense that justice has been fully served, or that understanding has been achieved. The trial continues to be delayed, pushed further into the future by legal procedures and technicalities. Alex Kong, his father, and his brother remain in custody, their guilt seemingly clear from the physical evidence but not yet confirmed by a court of law. Abby's children grow older without their mother, forced to carry the knowledge of how she died, forced to reconcile the fact that their father's family, people they knew and trusted, took her from them. And Hong Kong continues to grapple with the reality that such darkness can flourish even in the quietest, safest corners of the city. What happened to Abby Choi was not random violence, not a tragic accident, not an unavoidable catastrophe. It was a choice made by people who valued money more than life, who saw her not as a person, but as an obstacle to their financial security, who believed they could commit murder and escape consequences. And while the legal system grinds, slowly toward whatever justice it can provide, the truth remains that no verdict, no sentence, no punishment can restore what was taken. Abby Choi is gone. Her kindness, her generosity, her potential, all extinguished by the very people she tried to help. In the end, her story serves as a haunting reminder that evil does not always announce itself. It does not always appear in the form of strangers lurking in dark alleys. Sometimes it sits across from you at the dinner table. Sometimes it accepts your gifts with a smile while harboring resentment. Sometimes it is the person you trust most, the family you believe will always protect you, the people you would never imagine could wish you harm. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying lesson of all. The flat in Tai Po stands empty now, a crime scene long since processed and released, but a place no one wants to occupy. The neighborhood has returned to its routine, children playing in the streets, families going about their daily lives. But there is a shadow that lingers, a knowledge that cannot be erased. Something terrible happened here, in this safe and quiet place. Something that reminds us that darkness can bloom anywhere, that tragedy can strike without warning, and that, sometimes the greatest danger comes from those we never thought to fear. If this story has left you with questions, with a need to understand how such things can happen in our world, then perhaps you will join us as we continue to explore the mysteries that hide beneath the surface of everyday life. There are countless stories waiting to be told, enigmas that refuse to rest, truths that demand to be uncovered. Subscribe and walk with us through the shadows, seeking light in the darkest corners. Because these stories matter. These lives matter. And the only way we honor those who have been lost is by refusing to look away, by bearing witness, by never forgetting that behind every headline is a human being who deserved so much better than the fate they received. Abby Choi deserved better. She deserved to watch her children grow up, to continue her work helping animals in need, to build a life with the man she loved, to experience all the joy and beauty that her wealth and privilege could provide. Instead, she became another statistic, another victim, another reminder that this world can be cruel beyond measure. But she also deserves to be remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived, with kindness, with generosity, with a belief that her good fortune obligated her to help others. That is her legacy. That is what should not be forgotten. The investigation continues. The trial awaits. And somewhere in Hong Kong, a family mourns a daughter, a sister, a mother who should still be here. The luxury apartment has likely been sold by now, the proceeds distributed according to whatever legal arrangements were in place. The Kong family's financial crisis, the crisis that supposedly justified murder in their minds, has been resolved one way or another. But Abby remains gone, and no amount of money, no property, no luxury apartment could ever be worth the price that was paid. As we close this chapter, as we step back from the details of this terrible crime and return to our own lives, let us carry with us the understanding that evil is often banal, that monsters do not always look like monsters, and that the capacity for cruelty exists even in the most unlikely places. Let us remember Abby Choi not as a victim, but as a woman who tried to live a life of meaning, who used her privilege for good, who believed in kindness even when kindness was not returned. And let us remain vigilant, aware that the darkness is never as far away as we would like to believe, that it waits patiently for moments of trust, of vulnerability, of love. The shadows are always watching, and sometimes they reach out and claim what they were never meant to have. Thank you for walking with us through this story. If you seek more mysteries, more enigmas, more glimpses into the hidden corners of Asia and beyond, subscribe and join us on this journey. There are so many stories left to tell, so many questions left to answer, and we will continue to seek them out, to shine light into the darkness, to remember those who have been forgotten. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never forget that sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are the ones hiding in plain sight.